Hello everybody, my name is Liz Cleaver. I am the Pro-Vice-Chancellor Education and Digital at Buckinghamshire University, and I'm really delighted to be here with you this afternoon to welcome you back to the third Study Hire annual conference. Now this afternoon we've got the pleasure of introducing two speakers who'll be focusing on issues that are of real great pertinence to our current circumstances and to helping us to think about how we can modify our practices to support the widest range of students to overcome both the challenges to access into higher education, but also to maximise student engagement in online outreach activities, really pertinent to our current circumstances. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker of the afternoon. Richard Dorney Savage is Area Manager at West of the Careers and Enterprise Company. He trained as a careers advisor and worked in the Thames Valley area before progressing to manage connections provision in Surrey and Oxfordshire. Richard then managed the creation of an integrated youth support service and early intervention service in Oxfordshire, before moving on to a role as CEO of an education business partnership in Hampshire. He joined the Careers and Enterprise Company in January 2018, continuing a long-standing involvement with careers education and guidance across the south and west of the country. And he also holds an operational link between the Careers and Enterprise Company and the National UniConnect team. So I'm delighted to welcome Richard to the conference today. Over to you, Richard.
Great, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So I was asked to give a very quick overview of the Careers and Enterprise Company, and then to talk about how we have approached the challenges to accessing young people to provide the activities that we are set up to promote. So the Careers and Enterprise Company is a DFE sponsored charity. Most of our funding comes from DFE, a very small amount comes from the corporate sector. And we were charged with, well, recently implementing the career strategy, or large parts of the career strategy that the department put out in 2018. We work across the LEPs. We work in all 42 of the LEPs or sub-LEP areas. We've got something like 300 staff based out in the LEPs called Enterprise Coordinators. They operate with 3,700 schools that are part of the Enterprise Advisor Network, and careers hubs have been the development in the last 3 years, and as of now there are 2,500 schools within careers hubs, which are very much focused on pushing the careers message across the whole range of activities, not just where we started, which was around employers and making the links between employers and schools. Way that we operate is through the building of networks. So I've mentioned the LEPs, I've mentioned the careers hubs, I've mentioned the Enterprise Advisor Network. So we are about communities of practice. We are a strategic body that provides support, guidance, activity for local areas to improve their careers provision. The Gatsby benchmarks are the framework that we use for that. Our second role is supporting the careers leaders, and this was the role that was generally created within the career strategy in 2018. And important that it's not just the careers advisor. Often it might be the careers advisor, but it should be somebody who has SLT involvement within the school and has the oomph to have a real impact around the careers provision. And then lastly, we do this, as I mentioned, through the framework of the Gatsbys. Now, what we wanted to push today is the message of progression is more important than ever, and that's not just us saying it. We're getting feedback from heads from schools that they are realising that this crystallises the phrase the moral purpose that has often been around in education for a while. So I first came across that in 14 to 19 days, and that was all grand. But actually, when they can really see the impact of difficult transition, then schools and heads in particular become quite exercised about how they can respond to that. We have an education leaders advisory group as a company, and they again are giving us the direction that actually this issue is a highly pertinent one for them at the moment. We did a survey just before the end of last term, and through ASCL, 72% of school leaders in that survey were saying that careers was now having a greater importance to them in their planning for the future. John Holman wrote the Gatsby indicators and is with the Gatsby Foundation now. And he today has put out a blog, which I will come back to at the end, that sort of highlights the importance as we go into a mixed economic situation of how all of this is going to impact young people. So our approach was, we have that big team out there, we're in a strategic body. We needed to support those who are working directly with schools to consider how they can have best impact in this environment. And I understand that would have an impact for a number of you listening in today as well. The way that we've done this is through a framework that we've developed and some CPD that we put out into our network. The framework, you'll get these slides, but the framework talks about a whole rash of approaches that we encourage as our schools and our enterprise advisors and coordinators to take when they are talking with schools. The aim here is to find the right strengths and opportunities to work clearly with the schools. So if we break some of this down, the first opportunity that we identify is around relevance. And I've highlighted that a little bit at the moment in terms of the moral responsibility. But what we also pick up is that there is a very clear local relevance to careers activity that is more obvious now, because the local LEPs, the local employers, the local colleges, there will be a lot of people knocking on the doors of schools, talking to them about follow-on opportunities and issues, parents as well. There is the national relevance in terms of Ofsted and the retained guidance that schools are working under to increase the amount of PHSE and careers support. And then there's the breadth of relevance in terms of making sure that schools are using careers as a cross-curricular theme rather than a standalone PHSE type of activity. I've got some examples in each of these areas, but what I would suggest is that I'll point you towards where you can see all of those at the end of the presentation. The second opportunity that we've identified is around creating time. So time has become a really, really precious item now within schools. Often they have dropped their tutorial systems and they've reduced timetable time to really focus on the taught curriculum. So what we have been really encouraging our teams to do is to look at different ways that the time can be used and how it can be used most efficiently. I'd suggest a link into widening participation in UniConnect activities here is that at the very simple strategic level, we've seen a massive increase in the amount of strategic activity that schools and thought that schools have been putting into careers in the last 4 or 5 months. And we would really encourage a joined up approach to that from the kind of organisations like ourselves and yourselves that are working with schools. So being efficient about the time that we draw from the SLT, but using that careers leader as the beacon person within the institution. The second way of using the time is to layer the activities so that any activity can be multiplied by considering the different impacts that can be gained from it. So that might be some of the maths input that might be being provided to a student. Can that maths input have an element of career added to it? Can it have an element of progression and opportunity awareness being added to it? So building that wider curriculum has been particularly relevant as well. And then the last part of creating the time is to look at alternative ways of doing it. We are doing a lot of out of education time or out of school time activities now, whether that's webinars or additional resources. The embedding in the curriculum I've mentioned as one of the ways of being efficient about activities, but it's particularly relevant and is an area that has been underdeveloped in the Gatsby indicators up until now. So there's a lot of resources that have been put together by people, and the sharing of those resources is really allowing different areas to make use of the cross-curriculum activities. Cross-curriculum also relates to the CPD that happens within the schools and to mobilise and energise all of the teachers. We have good examples of where ECs, enterprise coordinators, will be working across a school team through the careers leader and the profile that the careers leader now has within the school to make sure that all teachers, new teachers and drop-down days for teaching staff are all given access to a careers agenda. The practical solution side of things, so there's an awful lot of examples that we have gathered and can provide for the way that institutions and enterprise coordinators have approached the issue. So whether that's about virtual encounters, whether it's about careers events that are held in different ways, whether it's about resources that are boxed up and sent to young people rather than delivered directly. All of these different types of approaches are being summarised into 2 particular documents that I am heading towards at the end of this. A quick reminder for you, a summary. So what we really are pushing to our teams is think about the school priorities and what their needs are. Make sure that what you're proposing to the schools meets some of those priorities. We're asking our teams to link their careers planning to the priorities and also to local recovery plans. So I mentioned we work through the LEPs. All of the LEPs will have a local economic recovery plan. The second, and an example of some of the layering that I mentioned, is aligning to youth social action. So there are a number of things which are a challenge for schools at the moment. There are a number of ways in which they can be approached. And youth social action is one that we've taken as a quite high priority this year to really encourage careers to be part of a youth social action agenda within schools. We talked about linking and blending careers activities, whether that's within the curriculum, but also within the PHSE curriculum. So I listened into some of the talks this morning, and the link to mental health and well-being was being pushed, and again is quite strong from us. And linked to other activities that run through the year. We run a My Choices activity, which was around helping those young people who are coming to the end of their academic years move on, and the kind of support that young people get from there and the response to it has been really encouraging. And lastly, it's about having plan Bs and making sure that we're ready for the changed circumstance, which we anticipate during this current academic year, that there will be a flex between physical and virtual activities. There will be different levels of engagement available for young people. And what we're putting out there is a number of frameworks, examples and funding to help institutions and LEPs respond to the different situation. The particular resources that I was heading towards are a careers in context can-do guide. So from the Gatsby point of view, we've broken down each of the Gatsby benchmarks and collated some of the updated guidance for how it can be relevant in this new situation and what examples people have been using around the country. This particularly highlights the strengths that are available within some of the foundation benchmarks. So if you know the Gatsby benchmarks particularly well, benchmark 1 is the foundation one and provides all of the strategic input, and really pushing on that opens up doors to other things. And then lastly, we have just this week released a resources directory, which is a collation of all of the different resources that we've collated from different areas around the country, tagged and searchable in a variety of different ways. I would suggest that looking at those and looking at them across the board, not just, again, sorry if you know the benchmarks particularly well, benchmark 7 is the one most relevant to HE and to widening participation, but I would suggest very strongly links to benchmarks 4, 5 and 6 as well as 7. You can access those through these slides when you get them, or just search for the Careers and Enterprise Company. So thank you very much. That was me, and hopefully I'm within my time slot.
Okay, that's fantastic, Richard. Thank you very much. You are absolutely bang on time. Perfect. I thought that was really relevant to the current situation. The importance of working together was really key to me in that presentation, the importance of communities of practice, local partnerships, the moral imperative, you know, and I always think about this as not just because it's the thing we need to do, but because it's the right thing to do at this time, and working together on plan Bs. And I also noted that one of the points you made, particularly around the issue of time, particularly as curriculum becomes much tighter as we reduce the school day, we're reducing the university days as well at the moment. So that leads me to the first question that's been posted, which is around time, which is expanding the school day, which is how have you found that there's been engagement with or planning for after school activities and webinars, and is that one of the answers for us?
So we think it is one of the answers. It's not the panacea for everything, but what we have found is that we have supported the LEPs to provide a whole bunch of webinars that are locally focused. And what we've learned from that is that where they are well presented, they will get a decent audience. They will also get an ongoing audience. So we ran some activities called My Choices over the summer. 3rd of August, we ran a national broadcast, and that was grand, and that had 10,000-ish young people tune into it. Subsequently, 150,000 young people have downloaded the resources, or 150,000 people, some of them may have been young, have downloaded the resources from the archive website for that. So the logic here is that an engaging input that is available at a time that young people want to access it does have a real benefit to this approach.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard. Do we have any other questions? I'm looking at the question and answer panel, and nothing's come up yet. I suppose one of the questions that maybe that I can pose to you, Richard, is, yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit about some of the issues that are arising. If there was one thing that you would change at the moment that would help with the issues that you've raised, what would it be?
I genuinely think it's about our attitudes as individuals and organisations going into this. It's not a coincidence that we're calling our guide at the moment the Can-Do Guide. It's not a coincidence that we've talked about a lot of our CPD around challenging opportunities and rising to the challenge. We make assumptions about the way that schools are going to react to this without necessarily talking to them. And we also make assumptions about the way that employers, possibly even in universities, are going to react to the situation. And what we found is that from employers, there is a wave of interest, both in a bit of self-interest to support their future workforce, but also a massive interest in employers wanting to do the right thing and seeing that supporting young people and giving young people the message that they have access to a future has been really empowering. So we're really encouraging our teams and the schools that we're working with to consider what is possible and to look at varieties of their existing activity rather than necessarily say, I can't just repeat what's been happening in the past and therefore I'm going to give up.
Thank you, that's great. And we've got time just for one more question, which is, are there any key tips you have for organisations wanting to develop partnerships going forward in the post-COVID landscape?
Yeah, so the tips I would particularly have are about the agendas and priorities. So first off would be, if you haven't done so already, contact your, if you're seeking partnership around the activities that we're involved with, contact your enterprise coordinators or your careers hubs within your local areas. They are not seeking to duplicate or compete with other activities. They are there to facilitate and to build communities of practice. So their role is to grow those partnerships. Look at the priorities and the ways that you and your inputs can contribute to those, whether that is at the LEP level, and that's about recovery, it's about key sectors, it's about progression, or whether it's at the school level, where it may be about highlighting the impact that you can have on their Gatsby indicators, which have an impact on Ofsted, or whether it's about the contribution that you can make to their extracurricular outcomes. and those activities. And I'll quickly drop in, no, it's not realistic to expect schools to meet the benchmarks by the end of 2020. There is a white paper, an FE white paper due in the next month or so, which will provide a refresh for the careers strategy and a retargeting. We will not be anywhere near a position where all schools will have met all benchmarks by the end of 2020, but the amount of progress that they have made since 2018 has been encouraging enough that DfE have bought into the idea that a refresh of the targets to a more realistic progression over the coming years is a better way of approaching it, and possibly moving a little bit away from the benchmarks being the be all and end all.
Thank you very much for that. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to take any more questions directly to Richard now, because we do have to move on to our second speaker, but we'll try and answer them after the session if we don't manage to get to them at the very end. So I'm delighted now to move us on to our second speaker, who is Annette Hayton. She's Senior Research Fellow at the Department of Education at the University of Bath, and she currently convenes the NERUPI network, which is, for those who didn't know, the network of evaluating and researching university participation interventions. She was previously head of widening participation at Goldsmiths, University of London, and at the University of Bath. She's currently involved in innovative practice. She's currently the innovative practice editor for the journal Widening Participation and Lifelong Learning, and is a member of the International Centre for Higher Education Management at the University of Bath. So I'm delighted to welcome Annette to be our second speaker this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Liz. I'm very pleased to be here. I shall move on quickly because we don't have much time. So this afternoon, I'm going to speak very briefly about the Narupi Framework, teaching, learning and inclusion, and evaluation. I'm not sure that's the sort of thing you can really do in 15 minutes, but I'm going to have a try. Now, at this time of great change, it might be tempting to leave evaluation to one side and focus on delivery, but that would be a lost opportunity. It would be understandable if we saw evaluation as inspection, because in that case, well, you know, sometime later we'll find out whether we've done it right or wrong. But if we see it as part of a process of change, exploration and learning, then it can support that process and help us with our innovative practice. So I'm sure that most of you here are already familiar with the Narupi Framework, because Study Higher uses this as the basis for much of its planning and evaluation. So I'm not going to talk about it at length, but here's a reminder of the top level Narupi aims, which can be applied to all stages of the student life cycle, from primary outreach to postgraduate. It draws on the work of Bourdieu, who used the concepts of habitus. Now, that's a sense of, you describe how our experience is embodied within us, so we can feel like fish in water in a familiar context and fish out of water in another. And capitals. He argued that just like economic capital, we have stores of cultural and social capital that work better or worse in different contexts. So, you know, your knowledge about one particular thing, your social networks, for example, in one area could be really good. But if you move into a strange area, then you wouldn't have those social networks of support. And that's one of the things that that impacts on our students from underrepresented groups. So as we've seen, the aims and objectives in the Narupi Framework are based on theory, but not just Bourdieu's theory. And this is an important aspect that distinguishes the Narupi Framework from many other approaches to evaluation. As well as drawing on theory, it also combines insights from practice, which is why we say it's a praxis-based framework. So some people say praxis is a bit complicated, but it's just a short way really of saying theory and practice, thinking and doing.
Annette, please could you share your presentation?
I am. Aha. So sorry. I'm going to end show and try it again. So thank you for saying, because I was whipping away there. So we're getting that now?
Yes, that's working now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I thank you for letting me know, because it was showing up as it's one of those days on technical for me. So I'll just whip back to that NERUPI framework so that people can see it. So we've got the know, develop knowledge and awareness, and that can be very important for uni-connect partnerships and careers, and choosing similarly. And the thing I was talking about just now, the habitus, that's related to become, so that aim to develop that confidence to negotiate those challenges of university life. Okay, so we're combining insights from theory and practice, and the theory and associated aims also underpin the design of programs and individual activities as well as their evaluation. So you don't need to have separate aims and objectives, but of course you need to have different techniques. But today I'm focusing on two areas, praxis and critical pedagogy. So that praxis where we combine theory and practice. So note the key concepts in this quote here. This was about higher education actually, although Paulo Freire worked on secondary education in Brazil. So partners, so we're working together, and the creative power of students, which we've seen quite a lot of that this morning in some of the activities, and getting them to generate their own understanding and meaning. So that in a sense, what we're trying to do is develop critical and creative thinkers and independent learners with a sense of their own agency. Now, this does not mean that students know as much as their teachers, or that there's no place for acquiring knowledge or information. But students do know some things that their teachers do not. And the aim is not for students to repeat what they've been told, but for them to develop that sense of agency, critical and creative thinkers. Well, as we've seen, there's lots of advantages to going online once you get used to it. We're not bound by time, space or capacity. I just found that article in The Guardian about how shocking it was that students were going to be getting some of their lectures online, whereas now we're all quite relieved and starting to work out how that can be supported in other ways. But there are always issues though. Instead of travel issues, we have technology problems, and for students it can be lack of equipment and broadband. And of course there's that all important one, real life contact. Because I think what we've discovered is that we can have we can make much more use of new technologies than we have done in the past, but we can have to work in a different way. I mean, there's the temptation to just stream or record a lecture or presentation and say, job done. But that's problematic. Participants need to engage in order to earn and develop. I mean, teachers and lecturers tell me that discussion engagement is the thing they miss most and is harder online. And ideally, they'd want to move to a system of blended learning. But we have seen some very creative work. At the NERUPI convention last week, Diana Laurillard talked about a conversational framework that she's developed specifically for online learning. But of course, it would apply to face-to-face as well. The difference being that with in-person teaching, you can more easily adapt to the group. But good pedagogy is even more important for online learning. It's important to be clear about the elements of learning that you're using. Is it acquisition? Is it, that normal, what we would see as the lecture, or the presentation? Or is it discussion or collaboration or production of something? All of those Diana Laurillard sets out as types of learning. And of course, you don't do everything in every session, but it is important to understand how students engage and learn. Now, if we look at this, these things here, these are some of the things that we've seen people developing as part of their online outreach. I don't know whether anybody's done Designer University. That was one of our favourite face-to-face for younger children, Designer University, and then do a little presentation about it or show it in the room. But I know people are using reflective diaries, either digitally or written now. A collage, either doing the collage and then doing it or producing it digitally. Some are getting very ambitious about online games clubs. So here are a few common activities. But how do you evaluate those? Well, there's no reason why your evaluation couldn't be integrated into the activity. I mean, the quiz is easy. You can link that to acquisition of knowledge and you test what the participants have learned. I mean, you could do it at the end, but you could integrate it into the activity, and I think a lot of people do. You could have a group discussion, of course, but that could be observed or even conducted as a focus group if you've got the skills. And it doesn't have to be additional to the event, it could be with the activity. The online games groups, well, that would have a product which could be assessed in some way. And student engagement could also be monitored by observation. And you could evaluate not only the design of the university, but you could also feedback on the presentation. So these would be the key elements. So what I'm suggesting is that we think of creative ways of embedding evaluation and thinking that we're all part of a process of learning and development, that the evaluator isn't somebody who comes along and sort of tests you on whether you've done it right and tells you that you haven't or you have at the end. Continuous process of improvement. So we embed that evaluation into planning sessions, work collaboratively with a range of people and include the evaluator, agree clear aims and objectives for the activity and of course then the evaluation, and they develop the skills to reflect and evaluate together. So I've just put the link to the NERUPI website there. So I think I'm on time. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Annette. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed that, and particularly your discussion of Laurelard's framework, which I'm really delighted to say is underpinning all of our work for hybrid online curriculum at Buckinghamshire New University this semester. But also really excited to hear you talk about cultural capital and habitus as a lapsed sociologist, as I call myself, from my early career in sociology. So we've some questions coming in. There's one here around what advice you'd give to outreach practitioners who may want to expand their normal evaluation methods, but don't have experience of some of the methods that you're talking about.
I think identify, don't try to do everything at once. Work with your evaluator and other sources where you can develop those skills. So let's say that focus group suggestion I made. We'll say, okay, we have lots of discussions, let's do that. Or observation would be easier, and try to develop a template for observation that wouldn't then just have to be the evaluator, but could be other members of the team. Just take it step by step like that.
Okay. Do we have any other questions coming in? We have just 1 or 2 minutes left of our slot. So there's nothing coming into the chat box that I can see. I mean, I put one in there which I wasn't going to bring up, but maybe it's one that I will bring up. I once tried to develop an equivalent competition. There was a competition called The School We'd Like in The Guardian, and I tried to develop one called The University We'd Like. It never quite got off the ground, and I like the idea of getting school pupils, school students to engage in thinking through what might university be and look like for me.
Well, that was done very often as some sort of board game activity. Yeah. But of course, which I guess you could still do. I mean, I think the opportunities are amazing, as Richard was saying, because the schools are now, of course, they've got better at online as well. And that whole scheduling thing of trying to get a school up to the university every time you want to do something or get down to the university is overcome. And so there's a lot more that we could do if we work with the teachers. But I think what we should also do is think about how that would combine with face-to-face. When would the trip to the university be important? And when could you do it online? And similarly, I would guess to employers, when is it good to have a trip to actually see something? At what point do you get there when you don't want to do it virtually anymore?
That's great. So I'm looking at my clock, and we have actually now come to the end of our slot. So it just remains for me to thank our speakers very much for their excellent, really insightful presentations and thought-provoking presentations, and to our delegates for providing some pertinent questions and discussion this afternoon. So before we leave the session, I now need to just remind you to make sure you click on the link on the website if you want to attend the panel discussion, which is to begin shortly. And the link is just being also put up on a slide now for you to have a look at. So thank you very much again to both our speakers and to those who've organised the session, and to the audience, and for allowing me to host the session. It's been great.
Thank you.